Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to this rearranged meeting of the People and Culture Committee, which is taking place today, 5th of October 2022, as the original meeting scheduled for the 16th of September 2022 was postponed due to the official mourning period. I can confirm the agenda and papers for this meeting are the same as those published for the original meeting date of the 16th of September 2022. I've had apologies for absence from Councillors Jacobs and Varney. And
we seem to be missing Councillor Tucker at the moment, but he might join us.
Yes. So let's move on to the emergency evacuation procedures, which CFO Shilton will allude us to.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members, colleagues. No planned fire alarm this morning, so if it does go off, it will be for a particular reason. So if you'd like to exit the building to the far left of the, to my far left, if you like, in the corner there's a door, and we congregate on the rear yard at the back of the building itself. It is raining out there, so my advice is take your coat if it does go off. So thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to declarations of interest. Would anybody like to declare anything? No declarations of interest, thank you. And I understand we've received no public access statements. Excellent.
Can I just also mention this is obviously a working fire station, so if there is a shout, we might need to pause the meeting just to let the noise to pass, and then we'll resume as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to move on to Chair's business, and I'd like to confirm that this committee meeting is taking place as a face-to-face meeting. We are also recording this meeting for the public to view. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the members to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Davies.
Councillor Don Davies from North Somerset.
Councillor Brian Hopkinson from South Gloss District Council.
Good morning, Adam Monk. I represent South Filton in South Gloss.
Good morning, Shelley Bromley, Bath and North East Somerset Council.
And I'm Councillor David Wilcox from Lockleys in Bristol and Chair.
Good morning. My name's Brenda Massey. I'm Councillor for Southmead and also Chair of the Fire Authority.
Thank you all. And now we'll move on to officers, starting with Karen.
Good morning, I'm Karen Shield, Head of Human Resources.
Good morning, Amanda Brown, Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Good morning, Simon Shilton, your Chief Forester and Chief Executive Officer.
Good morning, Paulina Plaga, Temporary Health, Safety, Welfare, Wellbeing and Fitness Manager.
Good morning, Richard Stokes, Cultural Inclusion Manager.
Good morning, Lee Wright. I'm a Group Manager in Learning and Development.
Morning, Matthew Crevetto, Second Group Manager, Learning and Development.
Thank you, one and all. And I'd like to advise that any voting that will be taking place will take place as follows, and I'll ask the members for any votes against, any abstentions, and then take a show of hands for all other members voting for. And next, to move on to the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the People and Culture Committee held on the 18th of May. Does anybody have any amendments or questions about those minutes to raise? I'll take that as I read. Does anybody like to move these minutes?
Are you going to move on us on a second?
I'll move them then, and somebody can second me. Thank you. And then the minutes of the meeting of the People and Culture Committee held on the 9th of June 2022.
Can we have a vote for the minutes?
Oh, sorry, thank you. Yeah. Can we have a votes for the minutes? So any votes against, any abstentions, and then a show of hands to vote for the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll move on to the minutes of the People and Culture Committee held on the 9th of June. Any amendments that people would like to make? No? So I'd like to move. Who would like to second?
Shelley. I wasn't here, sorry.
Shelley wasn't here. Councillor Davies. And so any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes for. Thank you very much. So now we can move on to the HR and recruitment update. I'm assuming that Karen's going to be giving that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Quite a short report from me. Normally I sort of give you quite a long report at every meeting, but quite a condensed one today. You'll hear later on this morning from my colleagues in both the DICE team and also the health and safety team, and you'll note from some of the content of the report, we work quite closely together, particularly around issues such as culture across the fire and rescue service and also employee well-being. So I'd just like to pick up a few of the sort of salient points within my report. Some of the elected members here today were involved in the recent recruitment of the Assistant Chief Fire Officer. A decision was made on the 9th of August to appoint Richard Welch, who is joining us from London Fire Brigade, and he will be starting with the service on the 17th of October. Obviously, I'm sure he will be coming to future meetings and will spend his sort of initial induction stage familiarising himself with the service. Obviously, he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge from London Fire Brigade, but we will be working across all of our fire and rescue services and also our stations to get familiar with Avon and some of the issues that we're dealing with in the service. I think we welcome Richard when he joins us in the middle of October. In terms of whole-time recruitment, unfortunately it hasn't concluded, so I can't give you a full and detailed briefing today, but what I propose is that I'll bring back at the next meeting a sort of final wash-up, if you like, of the current whole-time recruitment process. What I can tell you today is that there were 626 applicants in total at the initial stage of the process. That is slightly lower than what we've had previously. At the highest level, we've had just over 1,000 applicants, and more recently around about the 800 mark. I think it is definitely a job seekers market at the moment, so a lot of employers are finding that they're getting less applications, but I do think there's really, really good quality there, and we had a really good mix of people from across our communities. You'll see the statistics for the diversity profile. You'll see that 80 of those applicants were from the BAME community, so that represents 12.8% of the total. 70 were female, which represents 11.2%, and 58 were from LGBTQ+, which is 9.3%. However, it's also important to note that 98 candidates chose not to complete the equalities monitoring process. It is a voluntary process, and both myself and my colleague Richard, who heads up the DICE team, work really hard to try and explain to potential job applicants why we record that information and how that information can really help to identify the diversity of our job applicants. It educates some of the work that we do in our communities, just try and make sure that people are aware of our firefighter opportunities. So that's a piece of work that we're continuing to do over the next few months to try and improve that number and make sure that all of our applicants feel confident in disclosing that information. What I would say is that the numbers have been fairly static in terms of the percentages, particularly from the BAME community. We've worked very, very hard to increase the numbers, and there's been some really innovative work that we've been doing around mentoring, particularly young people from the BAME community, and putting them in contact with some of our existing firefighters from those communities to try and help to mentor them, make them sure they really understand what the role is all about, and to talk them through the selection process and try and remove any barriers. In the same way for our females, it's actually dipped slightly. Our highest percentage we've ever had is 17% of job applicants being female for firefighter roles, so that has dipped. But we had quite some useful decisions made yesterday at our service leadership team meeting, which is around the strength test. And you may remember from previous meetings where we've had conversations around the ladder lift and the strength test, which at the moment is a 35 kilogram shoulder press, which actually is quite difficult for some females. So even though we sometimes have quite a large percentage of females initially, quite a lot of them fail the shoulder press. What we've done is a huge piece of work which was led by one of my colleagues, Russ Mitchell, from our learning and development team, and he's done some work collaboratively with our FireFit steering group nationally and also with other fire and rescue services. And what we found is that actually the weight of the ladder has reduced over years, and we thought the ladder was much heavier than it actually is. And there was some misinformation that had been given to us by the providers of those ladders. So actually what we found is that because the ladder is slightly lighter, we're able to reduce the weight of that lift. So we'll be able to reduce it with immediate effect to 30 kilograms from 35. And we're in the process of making sure that that's communicated effectively across all of our workforce. It's not about lowering standards, it's making sure that we've got a good, valid occupational test. To lift a ladder, it's a 4-people lift, so they have to lift what was representative of a quarter of the weight of that ladder. So that hopefully will mean that in the future we can generate more interest amongst females and also do some work with them around the strength testing, and hopefully that will be an easier test for everybody to be able to pass. So what I hope is that those statistics will change as well in our future campaigns. So at the moment we're at the final stages. So whilst the recruitment process is concluded, we're still doing the medicals and all of the pre-appointment checks. So I'm not at the moment able to say to you from the final 24 places that will be offered on the training course in February next year, how many of those will be from those different demographic groups. But I'll be able to report that back to you at the next meeting. We're hoping to be able to make job offers by the end of November. So I don't know whether you'd like me to pause there around talking about that area of recruitment, if you've got any questions, or whether, Chair, or whether you'd like me to cover all of the report first.
I'm happy to take questions, I think, at this stage. Councillor Monk.
Thank you. So in terms of the reduced ladder weight, that makes complete sense, and it's something that people have been indicating in the past that should be addressed, not knowing the detail about the ladder weighed less, but just the fact we should address the concerns of female candidates. Will there be communication going out to previous candidates for the next round of recruitment who have maybe excluded themselves because of that preconception for the lift? And then my next question is, and then you'll be glad to hear I'm done. My next question is, I get the impression, and I don't know, that you have to do the lift quite early on in the process, and it's a kind of fail or pass thing. And I go back to when we were recruiting for Simon's role, one of the candidates made an interesting comment that if you join the army, you train to pass the course, and so it's about completing the entirety of the course rather than have a fail. And so is there any, does the leadership team feel there's benefit in maybe changing that element of the course, so somebody's working to complete the entirety of the course, and that is clearly a key element of it, rather than that be a prerequisite to enter the course? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So the answer to the first part of your question is within human resources, we keep data from the last 2 recruitment campaigns. And what we do is we look at everybody who's applied initially and then where people have failed at each stage of the process. So under GDPR, we can only keep that information for a certain length of time. But what we do is we email all of those people to ask if they would be willing for us to keep that information on file. Most people are very willing for us to do that. And then obviously we use that information to work with those people to help them to get better and to meet the standards for the next campaign. Obviously, we particularly focus on underrepresented groups. So yes, the answer is that we will particularly look at those females who did fail previously. We've done some really successful work before, led by Manuel Ilescas, who's our lead station fitness advisor, who works for Paulino in health and safety. And he's done some specific sessions working with sort of weight training requirements to help those females get up to the standards that's required. And that has been very, very successful. We also look at those groups for mentoring. So particularly Richard and some of our other colleagues have volunteered to be mentors. And it's around them putting those candidates in touch with mentors within the service to give them that real insight, not just into the selection process, but also what the role is actually like in reality. And now I've forgotten the second part of your question. This is the menopause for you, my apologies.
It was about the changing when the strength test is taken and whether you train to pass rather than have it as a cut-off.
Thank you very much. So we have changed the selection process over the years to try different models. So we try now to do the what we call the National Firefighter Fitness Test and the physical test at the latest stages we possibly can. And we're also a lot better now at doing our succession planning. So whereas before we suddenly realised that we needed to do recruitment and then we'd be going straight out to advert and then the selection process would happen quite quickly. We're sort of warming people up all of the time. So there's information on our website all of the time, and that information and help and support is available to people, because it does take quite some time sometimes for some people to improve their strength. So we used to also have a red, amber, green sort of pass mark. So then if people maybe didn't quite meet the strength test, we were enabling them to go away, do some more training and then be tested at a later stage. And we also, if you remember from previously when we were doing apprenticeship firefighting, we did exactly that. We had a lower standard and we were training people to get to a minimum standard and then to actually put them through the course. I think the only thing that I would is important to note is under health and safety from normally from week 2, the first part of the training course is fairly sort of classroom based during the induction program, but from the second week they do need to be able to lift and carry equipment. So obviously we do need to do some testing to make sure that we're not going to cause any injuries to people by making sure that they are able to lift the equipment that they're required to lift. Does that answer the questions? Any other questions?
Any more questions?
Councillor
Davies.
Thank you. First of all, a comment. I understand we've got one of our colleagues from local democracy reporters here. Are you John? Oh, welcome, John. Thank you. Good to see you. My question was around attractiveness of the job. Now, bearing in mind the statement that our Chief Fire Officer made about pay in the media a couple of weeks ago, do we test as to how attractive firefighter as a job is in terms of both the overall number of people applying and whether there is any difference between our various communities and genders indeed who apply for those jobs?
So, Councillor, I think one area that we have been engaging quite extensively is an organisation called Mabasa. In fact, they came here at this station. And that was a group of young people from underrepresented groups. And we undertook quite an extensive range of engagement around what is their thoughts and feelings around a career in the fire and rescue service, ask questions around their perception of the role, how we market the role of a firefighter. We've got some really interesting feedback from that group around how they perceive the fire and rescue service. Some of the language that we use may not necessarily be attractive when we think it is attractive. An aspect of around, the fire service is a family, as an example, and some of the findings from engaging from those young people is actually we don't see you as part of our family. Our family looks different. So that's something for us to reflect on, and very much of how we market roles, job opportunities, career opportunities across all of our communities. So we have started now to do more and more market engagement. Indications in terms of salary bands is an absolute barrier at this moment in time, particularly currently, because that's quite a big ask for someone who has a family to look after. Potentially some of our new recruits into the service have declared they've had to take a salary decrease to join the job because it's an aspiration of theirs to join the job, and so therefore they take a reduction in their income. So we are doing quite a bit of extensive engagement and market research to try and adapt our approaches and understand how the best way is to engage with our communities to attract applicants from all across our community. I don't know whether Karen or Richard wants to add to that research work that we've been undertaking.
I think it's just that even though the numbers have reduced, it's still, when I talk to pretty much all of the candidates, so when we were doing interviews, there was 84 interviews undertaken, of which me and my team did all of those. People are still very keen to be firefighters. I think the Chief is absolutely right. Salaries are maybe not as attractive as before. And we have had a few people who have met the final stage and then pulled out because they've said, actually, I've done my sums now that it's looking as it's a reality, and maybe I can't take that pay cut. But for most people, I think because there's no academic qualifications needed for the role, people find that very attractive. They find the actual role itself a really attractive role to do, and particularly most of them, the difference I've found is that they really wanting to work within the community. So it's less about the response side of the job that is attracting them. It's very much about making a difference to the community, and I think that has definitely been a shift, and I think people find that's a really attractive role. And also the promotion and development, our training team is second to none. So in terms of the amount of training that they get within the role and the ability to move on, both progress their careers either up the ladder, so to speak, in terms of promotion, but also to diversify and do different areas of specialism. So I still think it is a highly attractive role, but you're right, we definitely need to carry on doing our research to make sure that we're still not being, I suppose, complacent, that we're always going to have high numbers of good quality applicants. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Okay.
Any more questions after the report?
Okay, so I'll just finish off on the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Day. Councillor Massey.
A comment rather than a question, and I was just going to say that at the most recent passing out parade, it was lovely to see how many young families were there, and they must have had to take into account the financial situation. So, but they'd still gone ahead with it, and it was great to see them. Really, really nice. So.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think the only other part on my recruitment update is really picking up on the point that Councillor Davies has raised. We are facing difficulties across the service in terms of recruiting, particularly for some of our corporate staff roles, and particularly in some of the more specialist areas. It is definitely a job seekers market. We're struggling. We're working with lots of other fire and rescue services, other public sectors, but also lots of recruitment agencies are saying that they're struggling to get people. So it's something that we're looking at all of the sort of non-pay benefits in terms of some of the great things about working for the service in terms of flexible working, in terms of pensions, annual leave, all of those other provisions, flexible working, etc. But it's definitely a challenge, I think, for all employers at the moment, particularly with the cost of living crisis and it being very competitive out there. So it's just to reassure you, we're looking at that and we're doing a lot of work. But unfortunately, that is a sort of not just a local issue for us, but something that is being faced nationally by all employers, and I'm guessing within your local authorities that you represent. In terms of pay, you will know from probably the media and various statements that you know, including the statement the Chief has put out, there hasn't been an agreement yet on the pay deal. For the Green Book corporate staff, agreement has been reached with Unison that they have accepted the pay deal, and that was new information from the date that I wrote the report. And we've had some information yesterday that they have increased the offer for Grey Book staff, for firefighters, and we're awaiting information to see whether the Fire Brigade Union will accept that payment. So that is still very much up for discussion and negotiation nationally at this point in time. So we've got a downpour, so I'm hoping that you can still hear me as I press on regardless amongst the storm and the rain. So moving on to the next part of my update is around the culture survey that we've had from for a number of years now to try and get some feedback from our staff in terms of what is brilliant about working for Avon Fire and Rescue Service, and also some areas of improvement within our culture. As a result of that, the Service Leadership Board have developed a zero tolerance statement, which is currently being subject to consultation with key stakeholders. That includes myself and my team in Human Resources, Richard and his team in DICE, and also all of our middle managers, senior managers, and our staff engagement network. There is a mix of views around whether or not the zero tolerance statement is needed. What I would like to assure members and anyone watching is that this is not about dismissing people on a first offence, but it is about making sure if we're going to move forward our culture and make improvements and address some of the maybe poor behaviours that we have had, not very many cases. You will remember at previous authority meeting where I provided an update on discipline and grievance cases. They're very, very low numbers, but for every case there is potentially a victim or somebody that's impacted by that behaviour. So it's about making sure that we're joined up and that all of our policies and procedures reflect that, and that employees from day one are very clear on the expected standards of behaviour. That's very much working with both the Nolan principles that you will be familiar with and also the National Fire Chief Council Code of Ethics. So we've got all of these things within the service and they are embedded, but this is just another tool that we're using just to try and make sure that employees and all of our managers are very clear of the standard and what we will and won't accept within our fire and rescue service. Richard may touch upon that as well within his report later on this morning. We've also talked previously about the importance of being consistent on some of our decisions around discipline and grievance, and I led a session at the end of August with our service leadership team looking at a past disciplinary case, which obviously I anonymised, but we went through it and we sort of did it as a case study and with small groups of people working on that case study to see whether or not they would make the same decisions based on the information they were given. And what was really, really pleasing to know is that all of us were very much aligned. You know, we had all of the policies, the procedures there, and everybody was absolutely on the same page in terms of what action they would take on that case. So that's part of the development sessions that we do every month at our service leadership team, and it may be that that's something that we can do on a sort of more regular basis in the future, just to make sure that every single case is dealt with equally and fairly within the organisation. And then just finally from me, the Human Resources team was restructured on the 16th of May, and we've had an investment of 2 new team members, and that enables us to work far more closely with all of our managers across the service and with employees to provide more support, more development guidance for them, but also helping to drive forward some of the more sort of pressing areas that we haven't maybe been able to focus on more recently. So that will include supporting Richard and his team in driving forward some of the cultural change, and also working with Paulina in terms of the welfare and well-being work that we've always had sort of on our sort of wish list, but maybe haven't always had the resources to move forward as quickly as we would like. In terms of risks, there is a corporate risk related to this report, which is people capability and resilience. It rolls easily off the tongue. So that's just to say that that's reviewed every month at our service leadership team. We did increase the risk score at the last meeting. That's mainly due to the level of vacancies, particularly within our corporate services team, some of which we're struggling to fill. And that obviously means that we're not always able to fulfil all of our items on our action plans from both the HMI and also our service plan, and also the potential for industrial action. As I mentioned earlier, what we're hoping is that the reviewed pay deal that came out yesterday will maybe prevent industrial action, but that's something that we're actively planning for at this point in time. So we have increased the risk score, but we will keep that under regular review over the forthcoming months. And that's it for me, unless anybody has any other questions.
Thank you, Karen. I think Councillor Bromley wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you. Just a question about or a comment, really, I suppose, about the term zero tolerance, which is kind of like almost like a cliche, isn't it? People say, oh, yes. But I mean, I just wondered really if people really buy into it. And also thinking about the results of the survey recently, we discussed the fact that some members don't feel that, or some employees don't feel they can really make a complaint about bullying or something, because there was a sort of a feeling they weren't really being listened to, and it wasn't going to go anywhere really. So it's a bit pointless making that complaint.
So I think definitely one of the items that came up within our consultation is definitely whether zero tolerance is the right title and whether that's the right language and whether it's about sending out a clear statement about expectations of behaviours and maybe consequences of not behaving in accordance with our service values and policies, as opposed to it being zero tolerance, which sounds very punitive and big stick. So it's always about getting the balance, isn't it? And the devil is often in the detail in terms of looking at the cases. In terms of, we've got a People Services Forum, which is now looking at this work to sort of take all of the feedback on board from all of our managers, because you're absolutely right, it's about communications, it's about all of our managers understanding and implementing things and being on board with it, as well as our employees. So we've had some challenging conversations because not everybody has the same view, and I think it is very important. We had a conversation only yesterday at our service leadership team meeting, because it's absolutely key that everybody from the top of the organisation all the way down has an agreed understanding of what this means. So it's very much work in progress at the moment. It hasn't been rolled out fully and communicated to the workforce yet, but that's definitely something that we're alive to and that we're very conscious of. I don't know whether the Chief wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. The next steps really are to ensure that the refresh of any policies and procedures reflect that position. It is a direct response to what our staff are telling us within our cultural survey, almost to the fact of you said, we did type of approach, but also to build confidence across our workforce, that everyone feels valued and will be listened to, and appropriate action will be taken where it's necessary. So that's kind of the basis of it. It's not necessarily looking at one angle as opposed to another. It is around, we're listening to what you're telling us, we're responding, we will update our policy and our procedure, and we're giving a commitment of what you're telling us you want to see a difference in our service. And I think that's where it's generated from.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, Karen, for a very detailed report.
So you're just being asked to note this report. There's no decision required, but also for the minutes, can we just recall Councillor Tucker's now arrived?
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the Trauma Risk Incident Management update.
Yes, thank you.
Paulina's giving that one.
Yes, thank you very much. The People and Culture Committee is asked to know the findings outlined in the report, in the papers, concerning the TRIM referral process and the total number of referrals made. So in the last year, it was very challenging for the health and safety team. We've lost our 2 wellbeing advisors, and we're working really hard to refill those roles. So within those time, we've made 100% commitment to the TRIM and 100% responded to the TRIM incident, offering the TRIM briefing, TRIM assessment, and supporting all of the staff who were impacted by trauma incidents. As of today, we've got a new wellbeing advisor who currently is going to take the TRIM manager's course, so we are getting back on the track. The TRIM obviously involves any traumatic incidents our firefighters are going through, and also a control. We currently got 13 TRIM practitioners across our service, and additional 8 TRIM practitioners courses has been set for the end of this year. An additional TRIM refresher course has been set to the end of this year. We're also working really hard to get more support and more guidance to our TRIM practitioners, to empower them to do the TRIM briefings and TRIM assessment, and also to provide them with a bit more support rather than just a refresher training. So the support will include the guidance notes, some of the videos, and face-to-face training, and the workshops where they all can discuss any concerns they got, any experience, and that will be together with our wellbeing advisor. In the last quarter, we've had together 118 offers made for the TRIM support. And in the last 12 months, and I do apologize, I don't have the full data. The data I got is from the 6th of September 2021 until the 31st of March 2022, where we have 213 trim offers made. In the last quarter, the 13 trim briefings has been undertaken by our team, and the 5 trim assessment has been completed. And in the last 12 months, again, that data is from the 6th of September 2021 to the 31st of March 2022. The 31 trim briefing has been undertaken and 12 trim assessment has been made. There is currently no immediate risk to be noted, and I think that's all I got to say. Is there any questions?
Councillor Bromley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I was just looking at the referrals here and the number of assessments made, and there's obviously quite a big difference, isn't there? I mean, is it that people decide they don't want this sort of support, or and then if they don't have the support, do they then regret it later? Can they sort of change their mind and?
So normally how it works, our crew and watch managers, they complete the briefings with the crew, and they are the first to note it if there is any trim needed. But we're also looking at our system. So when we feel there have been the traumatic incident, which we feel the people might be impacted by it, we send a message or we made a phone call to all those who were attended the accident, and they kind of telling us whether they are okay, whether they don't need anything more. That's why there is a big difference of how many offers we made and how many actual people are looking for that support. We're also delivering a lot of wellbeing support across the station. So we do have a wellbeing sessions with the crews, and we do discuss trauma as well. So maybe that's why there has been much less trim assessment needed. Because of that reason, we are very actively at the station.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you. In view of the recent event at Twin Our House, presumably all the people involved there have been offered counselling and advice?
Yes, so we've delivered some trim briefings, and we've had a wellbeing discussions across the all who has been impacted by those accidents. We also made the offer and kind of explain what is available to all our firefighters, but we made those phone calls, we made those emails, and we ensure everyone were okay.
Anybody else? Oh, Councillor Monk.
Hi, so I just have a question over the figures. So I understand that it's difficult to provide the data because somebody's resigned. But my question is simply then, in terms of a welfare, there is obviously data that has been lost. So, but will you be able to identify if somebody's been experienced multiple traumatic incidents, and therefore, although they may be saying no, they don't want assistance on this occasion, but a compounded effect may actually mean there should be some intervention. So I understand the data's lost and the data's lost, so we can't do anything. But is there something in place to ensure that we are tracking what could be considered compounded incidents?
Yes, we do have a system which is called BOSS. That's where we can look on all of the incidents happen, where we do have the names of the firefighters who attended, and we do every month we do look at the system and ensure if, for example, one crew or one station has attended multiple incidents, when we, for example, have with the on-call, when they have few traumatic incidents, kind of in a very similar time, we went there with the wellbeing support, we've had a wellbeing session with the whole crew, also with the managers to ensure that they can recognize some of the symptoms of the mental health.
Councillor Tucker.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Chair. The 13 practitioners, the 13 trim practitioners, I guess they're sort of located around the county at our sort of largest stations. Is that pretty much the case?
Yeah, so our goal...
Are they centrally concentrated at Portishead?
Yeah, so the trim practitioners are across the whole service. Our goal is to have trim practitioners at every single station. That's why we do offer more trainings, and we do try to promote trim practitioners as well. So we currently have only 13 because of people obviously resigned. There was a few people who retired, and we had a few changes in the team, and people just decided they can no longer take the trim. So that's why we work really hard to get more of those training, and we're currently placing a bid for another year, which will be 2023-2024, for another hopefully 8 to 16 new trim practitioners.
Any more questions? CFO?
Thank you, Chair. Trim is an intervention. We have a number of interventions. So if we have a traumatic incident, we would automatically allocate a welfare officer. That's normally at the middle manager level, who would immediately engage with the crew involved in a traumatic incident. So that's the first step. Trim is then triggered normally either a request or an automatic referral back to the health and safety team, and then a trim intervention, if accepted, is then undertaken within 7 days. So normally the next tour, or not immediately, within a few days, because it takes some time for individuals to process what they may have experienced, for any sort of feelings that might come out of that. So trim is designed to have an early intervention to identify potential stresses early on as a result of exposure to trauma. And then that's normally followed up, I'm a trim practitioner by the way, so that's normally followed up by a one-to-one assessment around individual support for the individual themselves, and then access the employee support programs from there, so referrals into different mechanisms depending, and it's more tailored, depending on the individual's needs at that particular time. And then it's monitored, the individual themselves are monitored on a regular occasions by the trim practitioners to make sure they're getting the support that they need. The purpose of trim really is to prevent long-term PTSD further on down the line. It's a recognised programme that has been successful in the military, as an example, and the model is designed around the military intervention. So it's an early intervention. It's not our only intervention. Paulina's sort of identified a few others from there, but it's one of those that we utilise to try and capture very early doors to give someone the support, in essence, to get us to prevent us getting to crisis stage. So it's part of prevention and protection of our staff prior to any crisis element, and reducing that mechanism. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, Paulina.
Thank you.
Again, with this report, Chair, you're just asked to note the findings and the total number of referrals, so no decision requested.
So consider that report noted. And we'll move next to the quarterly training report.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Right, so I'll start with our operational training team. So starting with breathing apparatus, you'll note from previous reports that we've had a number of our staff out of date with breathing apparatus, and that is still the case at the time of writing this report. Luckily this was a couple of months ago, so we're actually in a position now where we're far better than this. We've been working very closely with the resource planning unit, and our operational training team have placed, I think it was 5 or 6 extra courses into their annual training plan to address the shortfall. So the good news is that by the end of next month, November, we should have cleared all of our backlog. So in order for that to not happen again, because as I said, we've been working with the resource planning unit, but just one member of staff working incredibly well to get us a system that works. We've decided that that's a pretty significant single point of failure, so we've been working with our transformation team to develop a process that will allow us to avoid this happening in the future. We're aiming for the requalification period for this subject is 24 months. So we're aiming for a requalification period of between 20 and 22 months to give us a buffer for individuals should they be sick or annual leave and many other reasons. So hopefully that will be a really positive process going forwards. Our tall buildings training, so this is your note from our previous reports that we've been doing tall buildings training now since February this year in response to the Grenfell inquiry. Phase 2 is almost at an end now, so we had an e-learning package, which was up until April this year. Then phase 1 was a sit-down face-to-face training session with a small element of practical introduction to equipment, really. And then phase 2 has been held mostly at Winterstoke House in South Bristol, near Ashton Gate, where crews have worked on a carousel basis to talk about our new methods of external firefighting and how we manage internally differently. One of the key new pieces of equipment that we have is like a large fire blanket, which we've got a frame on it that allows us to place it in a doorway that allows us to move freely between areas of the building without smoke travel coming into the areas we're working in. So normally we have a proper door open and then that would allow smoke to travel through. This blanket completely stops that happening and allows us to work a lot more freely in those areas. So that, as I said, will be complete at the end of this. It's actually finished last week. Sorry, at the time of the report it was going to be finished at the end of the month, so I apologise. So we'll be moving now on to larger exercises involving 10 pumps. And they will happen one in each unitary authority, although it will be for each unitary authority, but it might happen, they have to happen in Bristol because we've got a very good partnership with Bristol City Council and they allow us to use their buildings. So hopefully that will be I'll be able to report on that at the next meeting. Moving on to Severn Park. Annual training plan, as I've mentioned before, runs from April until March. We're midway through that annual training plan. We've had 2 whole-time training schools pass out during this time, which some of you have been to the graduation ceremonies. I hope you enjoyed them. That's left us with 47 staff that have successfully graduated from those courses and are now working on stations. And work has now started at Severn Park on the annual training plan for next year, 23-24 training year. One other thing to note there is that we've got 3 on-call training schools happening this year. We've got up to 10 spaces on those courses and we run in partnership with Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue so that if we don't have the numbers that we would require for a course minimum, Gloucestershire allow us to bring that up so that the courses don't get cancelled. So, for example, this course we've only got 2 members of staff on, but it allows the course to go ahead because of our partnership working with our neighbouring service. Moving on to my hazmat and malicious threats update. So we've just upskilled our crews at Patchway where the hazardous detection, identification and monitoring vehicle is stationed. We call it the HDIM vehicle for ease. So the crews at that station have always been able to deliver the vehicle to us. I say us, as station managers are operators of this equipment, but the crews at Patchway have previously only been able to do taking the equipment off the vehicle for us so that we can set it up and setting up our decontamination shower. We thought that we could be a lot more efficient, so they've now been trained to use the equipment to be able to prepare it for us, to run tests on the samples that we collect at incidents and provide us with a far quicker turnaround. The benefit for that is if members of the public are injured or if they're having to go to hospital because they've been exposed to a substance, we can provide a far quicker turnaround to the ambulance service and to the NHS on what the substance is, and they can then put medical interventions in place far quicker. On the same sort of subject, we've done some joint decontamination exercises with the Defence Scientific and Technical Laboratory. They call themselves DSTL, to make that simpler as well. These exercises were designed for us to demonstrate each other's capabilities. They're quite a secretive organisation, so it's the first time that we've ever been able to look at what they can do and vice versa for us. We did have a number of learning needs come from that, so we've So we started to design training packages for that. One of them is that we had a slight variation of how our different watches on the same station were conducting their decontamination activities. So we've addressed that and we're going through a training process now. Our urban search and rescue team that are based here, they have just had an assurance visit from our national resilience partners, and we're awaiting the result of that, so hopefully I'll be able to provide that result to you at the next meeting. Lastly, our rescue boat. The NFCC brought out a new rescue boat code towards the end of last year. Our teams have been working quite quickly actually to ensure that we're in place for the deadline for that, which is the end of November this year. So currently our crews are training in and around the Severn estuary underneath the old Severn Bridge. So they're doing quite a lot of work. It's quite technical work. I haven't been lucky enough to attend myself, but it sounds really good training. But that will allow them to work on all of our tidal areas within the service area beyond November this year. Moving on to our organisational development part, unless you'd like to ask questions on that department before I move on to the next one.
Councillor Bromley.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's just a question about the breathing apparatus requalification. I just wondered if you could explain what that is really.
Okay, so how the course is made up?
Just what it is really. Is it just like a sort of like a refresher or something?
Yes,
or?
it is. So every 2 years, all of our staff, all of our operational frontline staff will go through a 2-day requalification of their breathing apparatus qualification. I couldn't think of another word, sorry. So it's a 2-day course. It has 3 assessments across the 2 days. A written assessment, which is against the National Occupational Guidance for breathing apparatus. Then they also have an entry control board exercise, which is the board that is kept outside of the building so that we can keep a very close eye of who's inside the building and their expected duration of their BA sets. And then following on from that, they have a number of breathing apparatus wares. They do it here in the training building, which I'd be happy to show you around at any time. They have a couple of coached wares so that we can eradicate any bad habits they've picked up in the last 2 years, followed by an assessment at the end of the 2 days. We've found that having the coached wares has really reduced the number of people that are unsuccessful at these requalifications. I think I wrote down here we've got 8 currently across the service, which I think is quite a low number compared to what we might have had in the past. So that course is due for review between January and March, and we'll react to any findings from my colleagues' team and design the course appropriately for the next 2 years.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've actually got a question about the breathing apparatus report. Would it be possible to actually include the stats from the couple of previous quarters? Because I do remember previous meetings talking about how the stats weren't looking particularly good. And so I'd like to know that we're tracking it and have the ability to actually view it in one document as opposed to having to go through multiple documents.
I think we might have covered this in a paper already. I'll check for you, Chair. The reason I say that is I think the stats which were originally presented included people who may have been on long-term sick, so there were good reasons why they were out of date. And I think you asked this before and we've provided the information. So before we task more work, can I just check if we've answered that already? Okay. And I'll dig that out for you. But if not, yes, we can include it in the next report.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Hopkinson?
Yeah, not quite sure it's relevant, but it's interesting, this hazardous detection, identification and monitoring bit. Now I'm assuming that this is to do with incidents. So if there's an incident, then you continue to look at detection, hazardous detection, etc. However, I've recently come across something on planning on South Gloucestershire where there's a quarry down at Ulverston which is filled up with rubbish and effectively can leak methane. So then there's a sort of like a blanket policy which seems to be that if you're within 500 metres of such quarry and you want to build a property, then you've got to actually put trial holes in the ground and have methane tests. One such individual, which has recently done one, is complaining because the situation is, as far as he's concerned, there's lots of properties around, and why isn't there a monitoring thing in place? Because there's places which are just in the same area, which have got, built quite a long time ago with floorboards rather than concrete bases. So you've got the earth, foundation round, and then you've got the earth and you've got floorboards. So there could be explosions. I'm just wondering if a situation where local authority is asking for methane tests within an area where effectively there is already a lot of properties, should the local authority or somebody, if they feel it's prudent to have these tests, be monitoring in any event? I mean, it's just a sort of general question because, it would affect a lot of people. There's a school there within the area, so there's the quarry, and we're looking at a 500-metre radius. Within 200 metres of the quarry, there's a school. So I'm just wondering if there's any ongoing stuff which local authorities are supposed to be doing. I mean, it's a South Gloucestershire Road quarry, by the way, with all this stuff in there, which is possibly leaking methane or may not be.
Well, I would say yes, there should be something that they should be doing, and also the owners of the quarry should be involved in that as well. I think the chief would like to say something as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I think our responsibility in terms of the what we'd call the HDIM is really around incident related. So we've got an unknown substance as an example where life is at risk at a particular incident, or we may have a number of casualties and we're not quite sure why we've got a number of casualties. So we would use our equipment from a response perspective to try and help agencies identify what control measures they need to put in place or treatment that they need to give to any particular casualties. And that's where kind of from an emergency service perspective, kind of our responsibility stops. If we're request for a non-emergency, that's different arrangements. It is a regional resource, so we're often called to different parts of the region to use the skills and the equipment itself. When it comes to the monitoring aspect, it's more around, we've got an unknown scenario, we're not quite sure why we've got a number of casualties that we're faced with or people presenting with certain symptoms, so we would monitor the atmosphere using the particular equipment. So it's more of an instant response than perhaps a more consistent release of a substance as an example, because that will be down to the responsible person rather than ourselves.
Thank you for that. It's something it's interesting because I knew I was coming to the Fire Authority today. I wasn't going to ask that particular question, but because that was up on there, because I'm going to follow it through, because the reality is this particular gentleman is just building a bungalow, which is within the area of lots of other buildings, yet he's had to pay £6,000 for a methane report, which to him doesn't make sense because he's putting a concrete base in. So there's nothing going to be leaking through the house. So I will be following it up with South Gloucestershire, because if they felt it was necessary to do this methane report, and there's other properties around in that area, then they need to be monitoring all the time, don't they? So, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions or issues to be raised that are outside People's and Culture's remit? Thank you, Lee, unless you've got anything more to contribute.
I think Chair's got a few more bits to cover on the report.
I've got the second half of the report, if that's okay. Just take my glass off again. So this is now about our organisational development department. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, 47 firefighters graduated from the training school. So that's left us now with 47 apprentices in the service, which is being administered by Weston College for us, and the apprentices go to Weston College every 6 weeks for some sessions with them, and I've listed them on here. They include conflict management and inclusion and time management and so on. For the apprenticeships from the levy, we receive £18,000 per cohort, and for the first cohort this year, and it was just a one-off time, we received £3,000 per apprentice. In a government incentive scheme. We're also working with corporate services to engage with more apprentices in the corporate area of our service as well. With our PDR system, you may have been told in the past that it's not working particularly well. We're coming towards the end of a procurement exercise with that. I think it's been identified there were six companies tendered for this to provide us with a PDR system, and that's going through at the moment. And our promotion policy has recently been updated at the request of the TAP board, and that's been released with a light review 2 months ago. And lastly, there are plans to launch a Avon Farm Rescue Service Leadership Academy in April next year, and it will enable staff to, enable the service to identify talented staff, develop them, and encourage them to sort of progress through their career and promotion. And that's all I have for you. If there are any questions.
So, any more questions? Councillor Davies.
Thanks for the report. Just a comment around the fact that I'm just so pleased that the apprenticeship scheme is moving forward at pace with large numbers of people taking part. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more? Thank you very much, Lee, for your report.
So this report's again just for noting.
So I move that we note. And then we'll move on to the cultural change update.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I've provided a report which provides an update on our cultural change programme and also the next steps forward as we progress on our cultural journey. So, as in previous reports, you will be aware that we ran our second culture survey in June 2021, and although it wasn't the same participation as the previous, 35% of our staff completed the survey, I feel that there was enough in the results and the reports and the focus groups to give us a decent snapshot of our journey so far. I've previously highlighted that there were 3 groups that we focused on in terms of their feedback: those over 10 years service, support staff, and those who had experienced discrimination, harassment and bullying. And just to know that that last area of discrimination and bullying cut across those 2 different groups as well. We ran a couple of focus groups to look a little bit further into some of those comments, and that also included senior leadership team as well to get their overall thoughts on the survey results and capture any ideas going forward. A couple of key areas worth highlighting. As with any culture survey, culture change program, and any organisation would tell you it's not an overnight success. It does take a long time. However, in this last survey, it was encouraging to know that nearly half of those employees that participated felt really positive about the direction or future direction of the organisation overall, and many highlighted positive aspects of working for Avon Fire and Rescue Service. Again, another large majority also showed that they understood the reason for the need for evolving our culture in the service, and about 40% also said they can see improvements across their own areas of the organisation. So that's really encouraging going forward. There were, as in previous reports, areas for consideration, and these areas we are still working on, and they also become part of our wider area of work in culture and DICE, and as Karen mentioned, our newly formed People Services Forum. So just a quick look at those. One of the sort of key areas is equipping our managers with the tools to tackle inappropriate behaviours. zero tolerance has already been mentioned a bit earlier, and I will go into that a little bit further down into the report. But there are other sort of tools that we are discussing with People Services Forum and middle managers in terms of addressing these behaviours. Part of those will be included into the DICE training. They're already form part of the e-learning training as well, which I've recently reviewed and relaunched again. So everybody has a responsibility to actually complete that e-learning training. During conversations, certainly with the zero tolerance policy and other forums in SEN, we have been discussing and talking about the legacy issues that are obviously still very prevalent, and listening to our staff in terms of how we go about the best way to go about addressing those issues. And we're also working closely, DICE is working closely with corporate communications in terms of communicating about the importance of diversity, inclusion, cohesion and equality and culture, and the benefits they can bring to our workforce. So since the last update, and as I said, Karen's just briefly mentioned it, we've been working quite heavily on the zero tolerance policy. So in two kind of main groups really. So the middle managers, we've had a number of briefing sessions, about 4 or 5 briefing sessions, where we've really pulled that apart, the statement in itself, and we had lots of inclusive feedback about certain things like the language, the title, the purpose, and what happens actually during the process in itself. Personally, I found it very enlightening and also very progressive and proactive, and I feel there's a real need at that level of the organisation to really implement this. Of course, it's a complex situation. People are going to have different feelings and thoughts about the zero tolerance, even just in the name in itself. So we have really worked hard to try and strike a happy medium and provide something that is really fit for purpose. As well as being part of that middle managers briefing sessions, I've worked closely with HR colleagues and colleagues from transformation, and done some of that more specific work, that kind of more critical work in terms of the structure, where it will sit, and at the same time also updating the bullying and harassment policy, which is where this statement will sit. And I think that's worth emphasising as well. This is not just a statement that's going to stand alone. It's all part of a bigger suite of policies that do obviously look at and manage behaviours, being the grievance, disciplinary policy, bullying and harassment policy, but also it's part of that wider suite as well, which includes the values, behaviour framework, and also the core code of ethics. So this will be a major package going out, in sync, and again backed up with e-learning training, DICE training as well. So we're really confident that it will be taken on board by hopefully the majority of our staff and used in the right kind of way. Just a few more points on the zero tolerance. Some of the areas that we've explored certainly in the middle managers briefing groups are things like whether the zero tolerance should be a policy or a practice, how effectively we can communicate that across all staff, and having obviously half of the organisation that is operation and spread out over a wide area, plus different cultures within the stations, embedding it will probably be a challenge. So that's something that we certainly will be working on. Another key area that I thought was important in terms of issuing this is how that relates to our equality duties under the Equality Act 2010, our public sector equality duties, but also the National Fire Chiefs Council core code of ethics and our service and behaviour framework. It's important that we make sure that they all speak to each other and they all work in a synchronized way. Another key area we were discussing was the senior points of contact known as SPOC, so those who actually are chosen to investigate into disciplinary cases or behaviour cases. We discussed the potential for bias to creep in those areas. And so we felt that there would be a need for training, specific training for those senior points of contact and investigating officers to make sure that the whole process is transparent and we get the right results at the end there. As I've said, all the meetings have been inclusive, positive and progressive, and we are very close to actually getting that zero tolerance policy signed off and sent out to the organisation. So just to sort of round off this report, the next steps, again, previously in the other reports, are, again, we're working with People Services Forum, newly formed department, to work on making Avon Fire and Rescue Service a better place, which will then form that new culture change action plan. Exploring and implementing ways of embedding our service values and our behaviour framework, and also with the support of our cultural advocates and diversity champions. We've certainly been looking at those two groups there, and trying to find a way of utilising them to the best, to best use then, and obviously giving them support whilst they are embedding those values and behaviour framework. Another key area for us is communicating the importance of diversifying Avon Fire and Rescue Service. I feel that there is still some misunderstanding and some pushback, especially around positive action, the use of positive action. It's not a new thing. When I started my career in quality and diversity over 20 years ago, that was an issue amongst many employers, whether it be public or private sector, and the debate still rages on around the use of positive action, whether it's positive discrimination or not. So we're still doing a lot of work around that. Work, as Simon mentioned, with Babasa has been really, really useful, to have an external partner to give their perspective as well, and be engaging with not only our operational staff but our corporate staff will help to communicate the importance of diversity within our workforce. We also mentioned about introducing quarterly snapshots to complement the survey results, and also to capture any sort of new arising issues that we would need to address. That's still to be worked on. I feel that will probably be a part of a People Services Forum agenda. And then finally, almost finished with the DICE strategy, so 2022-2025 DICE strategy, which again will incorporate core code of ethics and the behaviour framework and values. If there's any questions, I'd be quite happy to answer them.
Any questions? Councillor Tucker.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, the final bit about the ageing workforce, obviously it's a bit of a problem in lots of areas in the public sector, I suppose, in lots of services. Just how much of an issue is that for us in Avon, would you say? And how much of an issue is that for us, and the implications of it, really?
Well, the whole country is the UK is an ageing country, isn't it? So I think for Avon Fire and Rescue Service, the largest group at present, and has been for a while, is sort of between 25 and 55. What we're seeing at the moment is a lot of our older staff are leaving the organisation. And in terms of the younger end, and as Lee's mentioned, we've got 40 odd apprentices at the moment. I keep an eye on those stats, and I can see the profile of the organisation is changing. So on one hand, for an ageing workforce, we have things to take into consideration, things like maybe the need for reasonable adjustments, which will probably form part of our focus on neurodiversity and disability as a wider sort of area for consideration, how we're going to support our older staff. We have a new IT system almost in place now. We recognise that some of that might cause some issues with some users. But in a kind of in another aspect, the new and younger staff coming into the workforce, I feel will be a great help in terms of changing our cultural journey. These are generations, a couple of generations younger than the existing workforce. So it's a little bit like a seesaw in a way. And, as these younger staff come in and may feel that they're able to challenge some of the legacy issues there, I see the profile of the organisation changing for the better. But yes, in terms of our ageing workforce, we are putting in place support and listening to staff for any issues they may be encountering.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you. Richard, thank you for that report, which was really interesting, very helpful, and I know you and I have had quite a few discussions about this. As far as the cultural survey goes, when are we planning to hold another one? Because I think we put it on one side for a time because of various issues. So have you come up with a possible date yet? For when
Another cultural survey?
Yeah.
In my honest opinion, I think, we've had, obviously, the 2018 Culture Survey, we've had this one last year. In my personal opinion, I think that we know enough about the issues that we have. I think a lot of those issues are legacy issues, and with legacy issues, we're talking 3 or 4 decades of embedded behaviour, culture. I think we have enough information for the time being to be able to work on those. Each one of those areas of consideration is a lot of legwork, a lot of time, a lot of investigation, a lot of research. I think the introduction of quarterly snapshots and how we design that is yet to be discovered. What we don't want to do is provide or ask the staff to actually do surveys too often. I think we can do that on a smaller scale. So, for example, we could do some of the snapshot surveys face-to-face on stations, and I think that would be quite beneficial to really sort of get under the skin of some of the issues there. And we could do things like Survey Monkey, sort of very short and snappy sort of surveys on particular areas that we may be having continuous problems with. But as an overall larger survey as we've had previously, and Simon and Karen might have different opinions, but I really think that we've probably done enough on that at the moment. And what we need to do is really analyse that, the information that we've had, the feedback that we've had, and work out how we're going to address those key issues.
The reason I was asking was because of the number of new recruits we've had in, and whether we're going to do anything with them, say, a year or so down the line, to see what we can learn from their experiences.
Sure. I do, for every new recruit intake, I always do an introductory DICE session with them, and I work closely with Lee and his team as well. And there is opportunities to sort of go back to them during that 2-year period to kind of, again, get sort of snapshots. What was it like when you came in, 3 months in or a year in? How does it feel for you now? And maybe do a little consultation with them at the end as well. But again, that's to be sort of discussed and worked out. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
So I'd agree with Richard. I think we've had, in the last 5 years, we've had 2 internal surveys, cultural surveys. We've also had 2 HMICFRS staff surveys as well, and we're expecting another HMICFRS inspection on the service next year as part of their rolling programme. Including that will again be another staff survey. I think with the quarterly snap, sort of how you're feeling, how we're getting on, sense checks will help. We need now to allow ourselves the space and time to react to the findings of the last 2 surveys, to start to build on all of the things that our staff have said are good about our service, and there are many things that staff have said are good about our service, but also recognise the areas where we need to focus on and make those necessary improvements as well, and give ourselves some time. And those SNAP surveys will allow us opportunity to track our progress of where we expect to be, and then take a sounding from that around when will be the next opportunity to be able to undertake a full staff survey. And I think we'll start to see that as we see the recruitment having an impact, the new entrance into our service with a fresh motivation, fresh thoughts, fresh opinions will give us some benchmarks around when the timing would be right for that next survey, I think.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, Richard, for your full and frank report. So I'd like to move that we note this report. Any objections? Good. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the date of the next meeting, which will be the 9th of December 2022 at 10:30 at headquarters in Portishead. So I'd like to move that we're going to meet then. Excellent. And now we move on to the excluding part of the meeting. So I'd like to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to Schedule 12A, Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and in accordance with the Schedule 12A, Part 2, Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Davies, thank you. And any votes against? Any abstentions? And votes for, please. Thank you very much. So if you could stop the recording, that would be great.